This is Saskia, and this is Note to Self, your weekly dose of everything that's simply too long to text. Consider this your personal invitation into my inner circle, where I share my thoughts, feelings, and quiet reflections that usually live inside my Notes app. Thanks for joining me. Hello, and welcome to Note to Self. You can see we are in another location, and this time we are back in my New York apartment. I got back, on Saturday night. So it's been nice to be here, albeit freezing, but very happy to be home. Counting the days until we can go back to Mexico, though, because I love it there. It truly is such a magical place. And then next on the ticket, we're heading to Miami in 2 weeks for my cousin's wedding. So more warm weather and fun times ahead, and then back to New York for the foreseeable future, which I am really pumped about because we still need to get this place sorted. There's a lot of artwork to go up and just organizing. So it'll be happy and nice to just actually nest in our new home and be a little bit more settled in the city that we choose to live in. So yeah, excited to take a break from traveling for a little bit. Whoa. Guys, there's the weirdest sound that just happened. It was like a squeaking, and I was getting PTSD from my old apartment about mice, but it didn't sound like mice. It was just this weird squeaking sound. That was so bizarre. Anyways, moving on. So this time, because I am always, I get jet lagged even if it's West Coast to East Coast, even though it's a 3-hour time difference. I mean, this one is a 2-hour time difference from where we were. I'll get a day or two of jet lag. And I was speaking to my naturopath last week. She lives in Sydney. And she was telling me about this exercise you can do to try and help with jet lag. And essentially, there's these, your 7 chakras of your body. Everyone's aware of those. But there's actually these external chakras. And I think there's 5, which makes up, instead of a 7 chakra system, it's actually 12. So a lot of people don't know about the external ones. There's the Earth Star chakra, which is below your feet. And the idea is that it anchors you to the energy of the Earth system, providing grounding and stability. Then there's the Soul Star chakra, which is above your head. It's about 6 to 12 inches above the crown of your head. And that acts as the gateway to higher consciousness and the soul's purpose. There's the Universal chakra, which is located above the Soul Star. And this center connects the individual to divine earth and the cosmos. There's the galactic chakra, which is even higher. And that says it's the bridge to higher frequencies, facilitating interdimensional communication, which I think is super fascinating. And that's something else I could talk about another time, but I won't go into that because they do say that different forms of beings, that verbal communication is the most basic form of communication, and they communicate more telepathically. And I think that might be what that is. Anyways, I'm going to pivot because that's not what we're talking about today. Divine gateway chakra, which is the highest, and that's apparently positioned at the very top of this expanded system. And it enables connection with the divine and total and spiritual enlightenment. So they're really interesting. It's honestly worth looking into. But the one that she says to focus on is this Earth Star chakra, which is this connection to the earth. And I think what's interesting is when I was going through the oracle cards a few weeks ago and talking through my process and how I feel this energetic line that pulls me to the earth and then the line that shoots above my head, it's going through those chakras. And I had never really thought about it that way, but that's what I'm kind of visualizing and pulling into. So apparently what you can do for jet lag is when you get on the plane, you envision that line, that Earth Star chakra that's pulling you to the earth's energy. You envision pulling it up and sitting that chakra within your root chakra, your actual one inside you. And you hold onto it for the flight. And then when you land, you either do this upon landing or you can do it when you get home. And you envision putting that root star chakra back into the earth where you are. So it's reconnected to the earth. And they say that jet lag is often your root star chakra trying to come back to you. It's chasing back to where you are because it's still in the original place. I mean, obviously there's all the physical elements as well, but this is more the spiritual side of it. So I tried that. I don't think I did it properly because I started already in the air. I forgot and we'd taken off. So I was like, oh, fuck. So I was like envisioning the root star chakra like following me in the plane to get to me. I had just taken off, but it was just kind of a funny something to envision in my head of this like energetic like silver line like chasing the plane. And then I did it to like ground back when I was in the apartment. And like whatever, it's like across country. So it's never that bad. Like the jet lag's already gone now anyways. But it should be something next time I go to Australia, I'm going to try it. Because it's similar to grounding, which is when you get to a new place, they suggest you take your shoes off and you go and put your feet into the earth of where you are and kind of envision this connection to the earth. So similar practice. Don't know if other people have tried it. Let me know. But something that I was attempting to do to avoid jet lag, because that's what I'm always trying to avoid. But anyways, another update before I move on to the topic today is I applied for the traders. Wow. Guys, keep your fingers crossed for me. I was in Mexico and I did it. And I swear my mom is my biggest fan. She's already acting like I've got the part. She's planned a trip to Scotland to come see me after shooting, which I'm like, Mom, I wouldn't even if I got it, one, you don't know like the exact dates you're shooting. So it's hard for you to plan. She's got this she's like, I just think it's going to be so good for you. I was like, Mom, like she's like, how many people apply? I was like, hundreds of thousands probably. Like I'm cautiously optimistic. Of course I want it, but I'm not like, I've got it. And maybe I should be like that. I should follow my own manifestation tips that I give. Let's just act like I'm already on the show. Great. But I was like, Mom, we got to take about 100 steps back. And she just killed me though, just like walking around like I've already had the role and we're going to Scotland together. I was like, God love her. She's hysterical, but keep good vibes out there for me, guys. Hoping that this works out. Anyways, today, what I actually really wanted to talk about was my current obsession with drum roll, please. That was a terrible drum roll. It was just me making sounds, but it is Wuthering Heights. No surprise there. I've only spoken about it a million times. Sorry, let's do that again. Wuthering Heights, for those on video, quotation marks. You will understand why soon. And for those who are not following the movie closely, there is a reason for that. So I saw the movie this week and I wanted to share my initial thoughts, my takeaways, the experiences I had. You know, I think there's a lot of mixed reviews about it, but I have my own personal take. And there was something that I actually had previously seen about a separate kind of pop culture moment that had happened last week. So Anna Navarro, I believe it was, on The View was talking about the Bad Bunny Super Bowl halftime show. This was also another extremely important moment in pop culture history, and I really was debating how I wanted to talk about it and if I wanted to talk about it. And I think, you know, I came to the conclusion that there's just so many people that are more well-versed than me and have, you know, are actually connected to, or either Puerto Rican or connected to, you know, a Latin country than I am as a white person. And they can explain the significance of the show much better than I can. But I think, you know, the show opened up lots of conversations about things that I've learned about different references in the show. And I really recommend people go out there and look at some of the commentators who are speaking about it, because there's so many nuances. Everything was a choice and meant something. And just my key takeaway was that representation matters. And it was a message of love. And I don't think anyone should or can argue that, although people are. But that's my takeaway. You can't argue on love. And people need to be represented. I've said that in my ins and outs. More representation and new talent, albeit Bad Bunny could be considered relatively new talent. I mean, 10 years ago, he was working in a grocery store. So 10 years is not that long. I love him. We'll celebrate him forever. Anyways, pivoting. I had to mention that quickly, but Anna was speaking about on the View. She mentioned how micro joys help us overcome macro sadness. And let's be real, this year has been, this last year really is being like pretty sad for a lot of people. And I totally understood that sentiment. And I think that show was really overcome a lot of, it was a micro joy that overcame macro sadness. And I think there's a lot of moments in pop culture that have been that for me, at least over maybe just this year even. I haven't gone into last year, but just thinking through this year specifically. And it just provides a bit of joy and love and some pure escapism. And I think that leads into Wuthering Heights, because for me, this has been such pure escapism, and I've just absolutely loved every element of it, from the press tour, the lead up, reading, hearing different reviews, and I'm a big Emerald Fennell fan as well. So diving into my review. So I wrote down my immediate thoughts right after the movie. I saw the movie yesterday. So my immediate thoughts: I feel broken. Haven't cried that much in a movie ever. The purity of love, but also the destruction. Maximalism to the core. Gothic, Victorian, romance, destruction, and desire. I absolutely loved this film. I have read such mixed reviews, and I'm finding people either love or hate Emerald's work, which I actually think is the sign of a good director, because her work's provocative and it makes people talk about it. And there's always so much discussion around her films. But I do think she's being given unfair criticism, with so many of the reviews claiming a lack of depth in the film, which I found absolutely absurd. And I just had such a completely different experience. So I really wanted to share my top takeaways and how I felt the film had a lot of depth, and just some also context on Emerald as a director. I guess she's someone that I've always really admired, and I listened to a podcast years ago about her work, and I think that's really helped me set the scene for who she is and what she's trying to do. And I'll also try not give any spoilers away, but there are some scenes that I will mention, but I won't spoil the movie, although those who know the story will know how things go. So my kind of first takeaway is, this is an interpretation. It's not a traditional adaptation. The title is in quotation marks, right? Which reinforces that this is Wuthering Heights. It's not what we should expect. And knowing Emerald's work, I don't think anyone should ever have expected a traditional retelling of this film. And we don't also need that. It's been done before. I actually like stories that are inspired by other stories. And male directors do this all the time. I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood completely retold the story of those murders. And I just think no one had issues with Quentin Tarantino doing that. And I just feel like she has been given an unfair advantage with people criticizing her work, because it's not a true adaptation when it never was going to be. So I went into the film kind of looking at this as more of a fresh, new story inspired by a classic, which also was helped by the fact that I don't actually remember how the original Wuthering Heights goes. It's been so long since I've even looked at that book, and I really don't remember it. So I really went in with a clean slate. And I think if you know the book well, from what I've been reading of people who've read it recently, throw it out the window. There's no point referencing it, because it's not going to be that type of film. Next takeaway, Margot Robbie. She played Kathy. You truly cannot look away from this woman. I've not seen her in a role like this before, and she felt very transformed to me. She has this incredible screen presence across everything she does. And I think that's what draws so many people to her movies. It's almost hard to put into words, but I just find I can never look away when she's on screen. And what I really loved about this role is she played this very petulant, selfish, super unlikable character, but I was still really rooting for her. And I think what was a super interesting choice for Margot as well, which I've not seen them do in other films. I mean, she's so stunning, but what they did is they kept her skin, what they called it was filter free. So they didn't airbrush her face, and you could see her natural pores and the texture in her face and lines. And I think that also created a whole other element of authenticity to me. She felt so real. I could see the tiny little lines across her forehead, and her face and the emotions were just so pure. And there was a purity to her as well. And you truly cannot look away from her. She holds this film in such a beautiful way. She's the heart of it, it felt like, but also just you kind of don't like her either. It's very interesting. But she was a star. And then Jacob Elordi, I didn't know how much I was going to go into him because he played Heathcliff, so he's the other lead actor. I felt like you have to mention him. And it's not that he wasn't good. I really like him as an actor, and maybe I'm biased because he's Australian, but I do think he's really talented. He makes really clear choices. He's incredibly present in his roles, and he does transform when he plays a role. Margot was the star here, but it would be remiss to say that wasn't because of her co-star Jacob. As actors, I think a lot of the time, and I say as actors because I used to be one and people know that, but I act like I'm still doing it. But there's little things I learned is your work is dependent on your co-star. You're acting with them. So she was able to deliver an exceptional performance because he was delivering an exceptional performance. And their chemistry between them was so raw, and it had this really beautiful tension, like a build of tension and then a release. And it was really well done between them. And he had this control. And I think what's interesting is I think about his character in Euphoria that has the same element of control. But in Euphoria, it's really dark and dangerous. And in this, it feels dangerous, but it's safe. There's an element of huge amount of safety when it's him and Margot, and you don't feel that with his character in Euphoria. Totally different characters, but it's that way of playing with the element of control and danger and how different it can be. And that's something that he was able to distinguish, obviously through the script, but also through the choices he made as an actor. And to me, his moment in the film really was the final scene. And I'm not going to go into details, but his walls came down and this darkness and the mysteriousness fell away as you saw this broken man. And I thought that talent that is behind him really shone through. And it was really such a beautiful, heartbreaking moment for him. And I really loved seeing the vulnerability in Jacob that you don't always get to see. Incredible, both of them, really. And it was also really interesting is like the height difference. And I thought in the past, a lot of actors, they would want male actors and female actors to be the same height because it's much easier for shooting to have them on the same height. One of the most famous stories actually was Tom Cruise. They would put him on boxes because he was pretty short to have him the same height as his female co-stars if they were taller than him, which I think is so interesting. But I remember in the past casting directors saying to me, like, they didn't want to hire actors that were too tall or too short because it was too hard for casting. So like average height was kind of a safe bet as an actor. But I think it's been interesting seeing how this has changed over the years. And Jacob is so tall and Margot's like stretching her head so often, but it creates this, it's immediately yearning because she's looking up at him. She wants him. She's yearning for him. He's looking down at her, yearning for her. They just can't reach each other. It was such an interesting choice. And again, everything in this film was a clear choice. And I think that was part of it too. Because again, you could pop her on a box if you wanted to make the job easier, because it is harder also as a director to capture that height difference. But it created this element that really added to the film. And it gave him also this kind of looming over her and this control in a way. I mean, they controlled each other just in different ways. But that was chef's kiss. Really beautiful, beautiful choice there. Now moving on, costume design. So Jacqueline Duran led the costume design. Her previous film must have been like Barbie, Anna Karenina, Atonement. When I was reading that, I was like, this makes so much sense because all those movies have such clear costume choices. I'm just going to keep saying clear choices because that's literally everything about this. I mean, who could ever forget, and this has etched in my brain forever as a child, the green silk dress that Keira Knightley wore in Atonement. So beautiful, so stunning. What a film. God, I love that film. And the costumes in this are not historically accurate, but I was reading that the whole idea of the costumes was to represent the emotional truth of the film. So I started to reflect on Margot's costumes. So her character has over 50 costume changes. Apparently, she averages a new outfit every 3 minutes, which which is wild to me. Ugh, and the costumes are just to die for. It also reminded me a little bit of Marie Antoinette with Kristen Dunst. What am I talking about? So yeah, Marie Antoinette with Kristen Dunst. It really reminded me of that because it was just such fun costuming. You could see they were just really enjoying it and creating just beautiful, beautiful looks. But again, every costume I felt had a reason behind it. So they were all playing with a very similar color palette for Margot. I'm specifically looking at Margot's costumes, where it was this ruby and burgundy color. So there was accents of ruby in I think almost all her outfits. I would say 95% of them. And the one time that I noticed there was not this accent of ruby, which is very much a nod to how the movie ends. Keep that in mind. I will not say how, but you will see it at the very end. But there was this one scene closer to the end where she's in this black dress with no ruby. And it was almost, the dress was like this shimmer. It almost looked like it was shining. It looked like tar almost. You could like dive into it in a way, but you'd get stuck in it. And she wore this closer to the end of the film in a scene where she sneaks outside to see Heathcliff, played by Jacob Elordi. And she blends into the darkness. And it's one of the few moments where you don't see that ruby. Because I think if the ruby was there, you'd be able to see her from the window. But you cannot see her at all. And I think the black was representing the complexity of her emotions in that moment. Because she's starting to fall apart at this stage. This desire and destruction is mixed into this single moment. The guilt she was feeling. And it's this single dress that I think is showcasing all of that. And I just thought it was so beautifully well done. And again, such a clear choice. Now moving on to one of the biggest ones, and I think probably the most controversial of what people are talking about, is Emerald's filmmaking. So I listened to a podcast years ago that interviewed Emerald. And this was when I think her first film was A Promising Young Woman at the time. And I've struggled to find the episode. I cannot find it anywhere. I looked for quite a while, but she's done tons of more interviews since then where she goes into kind of her filmmaking style. But in this interview, it's always stuck with me. She said how much of like a thriller horror film lover she was growing up. And that's inspired a lot of kind of the films she wanted to make. She wanted to make films that elicited and provoked strong reactions, which is super clear from kind of her last three big films. A Promising Young Woman, which is about a woman who was raped and seeks revenge on her rapists, and it stars Carey Mulligan. This was nominated at the Oscars for Best Picture. It won Original Screenplay, Best Director, and Carey was nominated for Best Actress. It's an incredible film. Go see it. Also to note, Margot, Robbie's production company, Lucky Chap, has been the producer for all of Emerald's films. So Promising Young Woman, Saltburn, and Wuthering Heights. And she's worked with her forever. So they really have this beautiful working relationship. And I just love to see two women supporting each other like this. Then her next film is Saltburn, which follows the story of a young Oxford man who's invited to his wealthy classmate's estate for the summer with his eccentric family. Those know how Saltburn goes. And finally, Wuthering Heights. And all of them are kind of looking at this like English elite and the darkness that plays behind all of them. They're all very sinister, is the word that kept coming to mind. They all have a sinister undertone. And I'd say A Promising Young Woman and Saltburn is directly sinister at times. So when you look at how she chose to portray Wuthering Heights, like, should we be surprised? Of course, it was going to be a totally different type of adaptation. And I watched this podcast where they were reviewing Wuthering Heights, and they called her, Emerald, a music video director, that she was a music video director, comparing her to Baz Luhrmann, who they also think is kind of like that. And I do agree. Her work has nuances of Baz for sure. And she even admits that Baz's movie Romeo and Juliet was an inspiration for this. But their take was that both directors put a ton of work into how things look and feel, like music video directors, but the idea behind it is often barren. This take made me mad, guys. Made me really mad because I found it so offensive to her work. How can you call her a music video director when she was nominated for a Best Picture? It's crazy to me. And yes, she's similar to Baz, and I love Baz, but I think her work has far more depth and stronger choices than Baz. Everything in her film, in this film at least, has a reason. The costume and set design has so much work put into it, and it wasn't because the story was barren. I think it helps add to the story, and I think it makes the story even richer. And it's such the opposite to feel like it doesn't have any meaning. And I really, really did not understand their take here, because I don't necessarily think Baz Luhrmann's work is like that. I think sometimes it can be a lot of spectacle and not as much depth, but I feel like Emerald's is. And I also don't think they understood her as a director, because their next take was about how Baz's films have moments of fun, and, Wuthering Heights just wasn't fun. And I was like, no fucking shit. Like, she's spoken about how her biggest influences are thriller and horror films, and I wouldn't necessarily call those fun films. And I would actually compare her more to a director like Stanley Kubrick. I saw so many shots in the movie that reminded me of The Shining, and the color choices in a lot of his films were so part of the design. And at one point in the film, because it has this very sinister undertone, I really wondered if she was going to go totally off-piste, and if this was going to turn into like a true thriller where Kathy's new husband and his ward were going to like murder her or something. It felt like for a moment that was going to happen. It didn't, but it had this moment where I was like, is this going to really be a different type of film than I expected? But I thought this idea that there was too much focus on the look of it, that it didn't add any depth, and I just didn't agree with that, because there were so many moments from set choices that had references to the film and really added to it. So something that I thought, two ones I really wanted to call out were, there was a lot of references to ownership and objectification. So looking specifically at Margot's character, Kathy, there was two examples of where I saw this. There's this thing called the skin wall. So when Kathy moves into the manor with her new husband, Edgar Linton, who's played by Shazad Latif, he brings her to her room and states he wanted to paint the room the most beautiful color, the color of her skin. And the skin wall depicts, it's the exact color of Kathy or Margot's face, to the point that there were even these like slight veins in the wall and her freckles. And it looked kind of like when you touched it, it was like squishy. It was such an interesting thing they would have had to make. So it had this very again, sinister undertone. You were like, wait, what? She's living in this room surrounded by her skin. And again, this element of ownership over her. And then the next part, which was also her movie into the house, was Alison Oliver, who plays Isabel Linton, who's Edgar's ward. She has this really large doll's house, and she gives Kathy a doll when she moves in. And she'd been collecting her hair, Margot's hair, when she was there previously. And she'd used the hair to make the hair on the doll. And it's really funny, actually. So the idea that this movie isn't fun, like that scene was very funny. But again, you're like, oh, this is really weird. And then she puts the doll in the house, in her doll's house. And it's again like this control moving around the dolls. She's in control of them. And yes, she's a ward in this house as well. But it was all very it gives you that little creepy feeling that rolls down your spine. And I mean, adding to that, on the funniness, Alison Oliver, who plays the ward, was hysterical. So there were some actually really funny scenes with her. She was great. Such a great actress. I had just watched Task, which she's in on HBO, and seeing her go from this playing this Philly cop to this role was so funny. She's an amazing actor. Can't wait to see more of her work. And then the last kind of thing around Emerald's work that I think, again, another choice that it really added to it, where there were so many shots of food that were very uncomfortable, but not in a bad way. I think the sound editing with this food was fleshy and wet, and the food was highlighting this intense, raw sexual fantasies that the characters were having. But again, it felt kind of dark and uncomfortable, and it reminded me a lot of the food scenes in The Substance, which is another horror thriller film. So no fucking shit. It was going to be a kind of dark, weird, twisty film. And I wouldn't even actually say weird, but it's dark and twisty a little bit. And I just wonder, why is it that female directors, why are they criticized differently when for making bold choices like this, because there's been so many male directors that do it all the time. And I remember reading this thing, I think when the film was previewing, it might have been at Cannes, and people were talking about the opening scene and how, intense it is. And just this might be a spoiler, but it's like it opens the scene and someone's being hanged and he gets like a boner and everyone's like talking about it. I guess, I don't know if that's something that happens when people die, but they had mentioned in Cannes how everyone was shocked by it. And I was like, that was really not that shocking. Having seen it, that was the least thing that stuck with me in that film. And it didn't even feel shocking. And it kind of ties into, again, like it was Kathy as a child viewing it, and her first, I guess you could say, like, that was like a moment of where she's thinking about sexuality as a man being hung, and then he gets a hard on. And then there's another moment that comes up later in the film that I'll talk about in a little bit. That's kind of another sinister sexual act. And then you wonder why her like love can feel so dark. Is that it's kind of a lot of what she saw was this darkness. So I think there is elements of, we're still fighting for more female directors. And I think instead of shutting them down, we just need to elevate them. And I just feel like women are held to a higher standard, which is bullshit to me, because I think she's done an incredible job here. And I don't think because she has style that there's no substance in her films. I really don't. And we should not be calling her a music video director, because that is just such a disservice to her work. I just don't think you should say that about anyone. Well, if you're going to make a film like this or any film, you should not be called a music video director. It's just so unbelievably rude. I just was floored that a film podcast would actually say that. It was really, really pissed me off. Moving on, because I can't continue talking about that, but the music. So the one and only Charlie XCX, love her. She was asked to create a song for the film, and she read the script and she said to Emerald, how about an album? Love her. She was so inspired that she went and created an entire album. And I didn't want to listen to the album prior to the film. I wanted to really go in fresh. I knew the 2 songs or 3 songs she's released prior, obviously, but I really wanted to just take it without it. And now I've gone and listened to the album. But Charlie brought such a modern edge to it. And, she blends her distinct pop electro vibe with this atmospheric sound that really built a ton of suspense. And I'd say, obviously, the key song for the film that was released prior is called Chains of Love. And I was looking at the lyrics for this, because the chorus goes, shattering like glass, it's the breaking of my heart. The chains of love are cruel. I shouldn't feel like a prisoner. My face is turning blue. Can't breathe without you here. The chains of love are cruel. I shouldn't feel like a prisoner. Beautiful lyrics. Both Margot and Jacob's character were prisoners of their love. Neither were able to move past their own defenses, but they were locked in place by their desire. And there was one scene that stood out to me, and it ties back to Kathy's childhood and the kind of first moments that she sees of sexuality or of sex. So she's older at this point, but you keep in mind the opening scene is her seeing a man being hung and gets a hard on. The next scene later on is, and you also see elements of like, you kind of have this idea that maybe her father was like abusing, or he was abusing the staff. So she has these very like dark views of sex. And she's gone up to see Heathcliff and she can't find him. And then 2 of the staff that work at her home, she's a young adult now, they come into the barn and she's above and she's lying on the ground, being quiet, looking at them. And the couple's playing with this BDSM themes of control. And she's picking what toy, quote unquote, they're all these chains, she wants to play with. And she picks a horse bit, which is the thing that goes in horses, the metal bit that goes between their teeth when you're riding them. And Kathy's watching from above and you see the horse bit being put into her mouth and kind of knowing where this is going. And before you know it, Heathcliff's come behind her and covered her ears and her mouth, and he's lying on top of her, shielding her from the chains of love. And I thought that this moment was really her sexual awakening, because from then she really started to feel things in a different way. But again, no wonder why there's just all these like cross references to things, all these chains, these people who were clearly the woman. She wanted this. It was a control. She was a part of it. She was saying yes, there was consent, and it was their chains of love. And her chains of love with Heathcliff became something that she was never able to get out of. And I think the music, again, was just such a clear choice with those lyrics and what it really meant for the whole story. And the next part that I thought was really interesting is you have the music, but then there's also what do you learn in the silence? And I believe one of the only moments of total silence in the film was at the very end. And Heathcliff has come to the house to see Kathy, and the scene is shot from the stairwell down. So you're looking down and you see this stairwell and you see him walking into the house and pauses in this kind of opening before he's going up the stairs, and it's silence. And I felt it because I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't hear anything. The theater was totally silent. And I always love when directors do this, when there's the removal of sound, and it's always makes you kind of stop in that moment. It builds so much suspense. And I felt like in that, my heart almost dropped as you started to really feel the emotional arc of Heathcliff. So again, a strong choice. Such strong choices in every freaking scene of this movie. And the final part of this is what I ended on in my first kind of key takeaway, which was desire and destruction. Ultimately, this movie is about desire and destruction. None of the characters are likable. They really aren't, which again is often the case in Emerald's films, but I couldn't help rooting for Heathcliff and Kathy. Jacob Elordi said something in an interview where he said, "No more yearning. We've had enough, tell people how you feel." And I thought that was the perfect description, because this story is really the story of two very damaged, avoidant individuals whose desire brought destruction for themselves and everyone around them. And part of me doesn't blame them, because when I started to look at it more, they both came from an incredibly abusive childhood, and you see elements of that at the start. And they built what was probably a very codependent relationship with one another. They defined themselves by their relationship with each other. They'd often say how ungrounded they were without each other, how they couldn't find their way. They needed the other person to find their way, which pulls at your heartstrings, because when Jacob's saying that or Heathcliff's saying that to Kathy, or Kathy's saying that to Heathcliff, you're like, oh my God, my heart is breaking. I love this. And the desire, it's what I've spoken about before. I think what was so popular with Heated Rivalry is that the desire, the lead up, the yearning, there's so much of that throughout this that you can't help but just fall in love with it. And if I had seen this movie 10 years ago, I would have totally romanticized this relationship. I would have wanted a Heathcliff so badly. I wouldn't have even seen the toxicity, but I would have only seen the romance. But I mean, it isn't romance. It's trauma masked by love. And it's not something you want to aspire for in your relationships. But I mean, I can watch this now and feel for these two people who just couldn't get out of their own way. And in turn, they became incredibly selfish, whilst also trying to find a way to get back to each other through this mess that they've created and this trauma that they've never dealt with. And today I'm honestly just grateful I have something steadier. And I think in the past, I even think of relationships I've been in where I was convinced the intensity was love. And in those moments, a lot of the time it wasn't. And I don't necessarily think this wasn't love, because Jeffrey said to me he felt like it was love. It wasn't love, it was lust. And I have been in those scenarios where it felt so intense that you thought it was love. And I think they were definitely in lust. But the thing that was different about the story of Wuthering Heights was there was a huge amount of love there, because I think Heathcliff and Kathy bonded through childhood trauma and they found safety in each other, and they truly truly knew each other. Kathy said at one point, I can say this about him because I know him so well. And they built the love and trust. I think the trust was there from childhood, and there was always this desire, and then the love came when they finally, opened up to one another. But I think lust took over in that moment because it was just a lot of destruction because they could never really have what they wanted and could never really share how they really felt. And I think it was too strong because they'd built up all these walls and they couldn't tear down these walls. Again, it's like all the references like chains of love. They were chained by this love where they couldn't actually pursue what they really wanted with each other. And ultimately it destroyed them. So I think it's such a sad story, and there's beauty in it too. But really, I think Jacob really nailed it in that, we shouldn't, no more yearning. Like, truly don't live your life that way. Like, say what you want, and we can watch this and enjoy it and love their love and be heartbroken by it. But it was also nice to look at it and see like the depth of these characters, and that like this came from a place of just trauma that was never dealt with. And there was a lot more to them than this idea that there wasn't depth in this film. To me was just so incorrect. And as I close out, I was thinking back on my ins and outs for 2026, and one of my ins was maximalism, which was inspired largely by the fashion during the press tour for this film. But I'm realizing now it's even bigger than just clothes and fashion. I think in a time when things feel really heavy, we gravitate towards stories that make us feel something extreme. Again, this micro joys in combating macro sadness. So big emotions, big visuals, big destruction. It's cathartic. It reminds us that we're alive. And I was thinking about some of the top pop cultural moments of this year. Heated Rivalry, big emotions, big destruction. But thankfully, they get out of their way so the destruction doesn't last forever. Bad Bunny, Super Bowl halftime show. Big emotions, big visuals, cultural representation that was just delivered unapologetically. It was all meaning. And then Wuthering Heights, big emotions, big visuals, desire pushed to the point of destruction. And all of it felt cathartic in a way, and it elicited such strong emotions. All three of those. I cried, I laughed, I was so in it. And none of them were quiet. None of them were subtle. And I think that that's what the point is, that maximalism isn't just like excess in fashion. And, it is actually, it's expressing yourself in fashion, but it's also about just feeling fully. And I think that goes beyond what you wear and how you express yourself. But maximalism for this year being in is just being truly who you are and expressing yourself to the end. And I think it's not the full story of Wuthering Heights of like damaging other people because you can't, you're feeling all these things or whatever. But I think it's just, we want these things that crack us open in a way because there's just so much heaviness. It's nice to be cracked open and feel some things. And maybe that's what art is doing right now. And it's not asking us to be composed, but it's asking us to feel. And I think it's really beautiful when you see this tie-in between these three moments. And all I can say is go and see the movie with an open mind and an open heart. And there's just so much beauty in that film. I was blown away. I want to see it again. And I really hope you enjoy it and can look at it with an open mind and not follow the haters online. And also bring tissues. Lots and lots of tissues. Oh my God. Like I said, I was broken. But thanks for listening to my TED Talk on Wuthering Heights. I will see you all next week.